Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thank you for tuning in and checking out my latest video. Now, this video is going to be talking about the Bernard Hopkins versus Sergey Kovalev fight. I am very excited for this fight. Credit to Bernard Hopkins for taking this fight at age 49. And this is going to be a good matchup of two different styles, so I can't wait to see how the fight gets played out. Now, let me first talk about Sergey Kovalev. Sergey Kovalev is a guy with an extensive amateur background. I like his jab to the body when he throws it. I also like his right hand and left hook. And Sergey Kovalev is a vicious puncher, and he's been destroying opponents so far throughout his professional career. The only fighter that I can think of off the top of my head that has given Sergey Kovalev an excellent fight would be Darnell Boone, who is a very underrated fighter in my opinion. Now, moving on to Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins is a living legend in the sport of boxing. He's a guy who is a very well-rounded fighter. He's very smart in the ring, makes adjustments. He also understands the physical and mental aspect of boxing. Bernard Hopkins has been able to fight so late in his career at age 49 because he is never out of shape when he's not fighting, and he treats his body like a temple. Also, I really like Bernard Hopkins' right hand he throws. I think that's one of his most effective weapons in the ring. Also, Bernard Hopkins is a master at making opponents fight his style and pace of a fight. You see that throughout Bernard Hopkins' fights. He can really slow down the pace, and he makes fighters fight how he wants them to fight. That's what makes him so effective in a lot of the fights he's been in. Now, let me talk about some advantages that I think both of these men have over each other. So let me first start off with Sergey Kovalev. Sergey Kovalev definitely has a power advantage over Bernard Hopkins. He's one of the biggest punchers Bernard Hopkins has ever faced. Also, Sergey Kovalev has the advantage in strength in this fight, and Sergey Kovalev also has the advantage of having a trainer who has worked with Bernard Hopkins in the past and may know some things about Bernard Hopkins that he can use for this fight. Now, when I talk about Bernard Hopkins and the advantages he has over Sergey Kovalev, Bernard Hopkins is a veteran. He also is a guy who is a more diverse fighter out of the two. He can make adjustments on the fly. He's faster thinking on his feet than Sergey Kovalev, in my opinion. And also, Bernard Hopkins is a better defensive fighter. And Bernard Hopkins, I might even give him the slight edge in stamina, even though he is the older guy. We've seen Bernard Hopkins go to a lot of decisions in the past, and we've seen him have a lot of strength and stamina in the later parts of fights. Whereas Sergey Kovalev, when he fought Cedric Agnew, to me it looked like he was starting to slow down a bit. So I'm going to have to give that edge actually to Bernard Hopkins, believe it or not, in this fight. Now, how do I think both of these guys should fight to win this matchup? If you're Sergey Kovalev, you need to back Bernard Hopkins down and land against the ropes. And I think he needs to work that body throughout the fight, especially in the early rounds of that matchup to slow Bernard Hopkins down for the later portions of that fight. Also, I think that Sergey Kovalev needs to fight at the pace he wants to fight at. Do not let Bernard Hopkins influence how slow the fight goes. If Sergey Kovalev wants to throw 30 punches around, 40 punches around, do that. Do whatever he wants to do in this fight and John David Jackson tells him to do. Throw a ton of punches at Bernard Hopkins and make Bernard Hopkins work. He is age 49. And now if you're talking about Bernard Hopkins, what does he do to win this fight? Bernard Hopkins, in my opinion, needs to make it past the 4th or 5th round of this matchup. I think his confidence will grow as the fight goes longer. I think once he gets past the first few rounds of the fight, I think he will start making adjustments to what Sergey Kovalev is doing. And also, believe it or not, I think he needs to back up Sergey Kovalev. I think that Kovalev is very effective when he's coming right at you, but I think if you back him up and you use feints and you counter him, that it's going to frustrate him. And also, Bernard Hopkins needs to clinch, and he needs to get Kovalev off his game. He needs to frustrate him throughout the fight. Do some veteran tactics that Bernard Hopkins knows to do. And in my opinion, in this fight, I have to go with Bernard Hopkins in this matchup. I think that Bernard Hopkins is going to win a decision in this fight. I think it's going to be a close fight, though. I think that because Kovalev is younger, he's going to be very fresh early on and have a ton of power. And I think he wins actually a few of the first rounds in this fight against Hopkins. But I see Bernard Hopkins coming out very late in the fight and starting to win a lot of the later rounds. And that's where I think he's going to pull it off. I think Kovalev will win maybe the first 3 rounds. And then I think after the midway point of the fight or before then, Bernard Hopkins will start to make adjustments and frustrate Kovalev. And I think that he wins a lot of the second half rounds, kind of like Floyd did with Maidana in the first fight, that type of thing, in my opinion. And I also thought it was a great point I had heard Gabe Rosado make when he was talking about Sergey Kovalev and Bernard Hopkins. He was saying that Sergey Kovalev takes big steps, and he thinks that Bernard Hopkins will be able to see those big steps that he makes and get out of there and counter him, things of that nature. So that was an interesting point that I thought Gabe Rosado made, and a very good one, because if you do watch Kovalev, at times he does take these huge steps forward, and that's where Bernard Hopkins, the smart fighter that he is, can circle out or can clinch him or can counter him. That's one thing to look for in this fight. Also, guys, 2 more X factors for this matchup. I think that the referee is going to be very important for this fight. I think that the referee is going to dictate what Bernard Hopkins can get away with in this fight. And Bernard Hopkins is a veteran, so he's going to try every trick in the book. So I think it's very important to see who the referee is, and very important what the referee allows to happen in the matchup. Another X factor is John David Jackson, who is Sergey Kovalev's trainer, used to actually be an assistant trainer for Bernard Hopkins. So I'm interested to see if he has any kind of details that could help Sergey Kovalev fight Bernard Hopkins, anything he's seen in camp that he thinks Sergey Kovalev can exploit, because he's been around Bernard Hopkins for many years. There's definitely, I imagine, some things that Bernard Hopkins doesn't do well, that he hides behind in training camp that you don't see in fights and things of that nature. And I think that John David Jackson can tell Sergey Kovalev those things and hope Sergey Kovalev exploits those weaknesses Bernard Hopkins has. So give me your opinion, guys, on the fight. I think it's a very close matchup. And I think that if Sergey Kovalev wins this fight, I think that he's going to have to knock down Bernard Hopkins a couple of times. And I think that Kovalev, if he wins a matchup, in my opinion, he's going to win by an early stoppage. Maybe the 5th or 6th round or 4th round, around that range, earlier on in the matchup. Give me your thoughts, guys, on this fight, and give me some of your opinion on why you think either of these guys win the matchup. I mean, this is a great fight for boxing fans. Credit again to Bernard Hopkins for taking the fight, and Sergey Kovalev for also signing the paperwork and getting this fight done. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning into the video. I truly appreciate it.